The gate agent's smirk vanished the moment she pinned the captain's wings to her chest. Denise Harper stood tall, her voice cutting through the terminal silence. "I am the pilot of this flight. 287 passengers are waiting for me." Bradley Thornton's face drained of color as phones captured everything. Before we dive into this incredible story, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from today. If you believe everyone deserves respect regardless of their skin color, hit that like button right now. Subscribe and tap the notification bell so you never miss stories like this. Now let me take you back 45 minutes before this explosive moment changed everything. The alarm pierced through the darkness at 4:30 in the morning, pulling Denise Harper from a dreamless sleep. She reached over to silence it, her hand brushing against the cold side of the bed where her husband used to sleep before the divorce 3 years ago. The room was quiet, except for the soft hum of the heater working against the Chicago winter outside. She lay there for just a moment, gathering her thoughts, preparing herself mentally for the day ahead. Denise swung her legs over the side of the bed and sat up, her eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering through the curtains. On her nightstand sat a framed photograph that she looked at every single morning without fail. It showed a young black man in a crisp Air Force uniform, his smile wide and proud, standing next to a fighter jet. That was her father, Colonel Raymond Harper, one of the first black pilots in the United States Air Force. He had passed away 5 years ago, but his presence remained with her every single day, especially on mornings like this when she needed strength. She picked up the frame and traced her finger along the edge. "Good morning, Daddy," she whispered softly. She remembered his words from when she was just a little girl, sitting on his lap as he told her stories about flying through clouds and touching the sky. "Baby girl," he would say, "you're gonna have to be twice as good to get half the credit. That's just how it is for people like us. But don't you ever let that stop you. You hear me?" She had heard him. She had listened. And she had spent her entire life proving that she was not just twice as good, but 10 times better than anyone who doubted her. Denise walked to the bathroom and splashed cold water on her face, staring at her reflection in the mirror. At 38 years old, she had achieved what many thought impossible. She was a captain for Atlantic Airways, one of the largest airlines in the country. She had logged over 12,000 flight hours. She had flown across the Atlantic Ocean more than 200 times. She had navigated through storms, mechanical failures, medical emergencies, and every challenge the sky could throw at her. And yet, despite all of this, she still had to prove herself almost every single day. She moved to her closet and carefully removed her pilot's uniform. The navy blue fabric was crisp and pressed, the gold stripes on her shoulders gleaming even in the low light. 4 stripes, the mark of a captain. She dressed methodically, buttoning each button with precision, adjusting her collar, making sure every element was perfect. Appearance mattered in this industry. Professionalism mattered. She had learned early in her career that she could not afford to give anyone a reason to doubt her competence. Her pilot's badge sat on her dresser, the metal reflecting the light. "Captain Denise Harper, Atlantic Airways." She picked it up, feeling its weight in her hand. Normally, she would pin it to her chest immediately, but today she was running slightly behind schedule. She tucked it into her bag instead, planning to put it on once she got to the airport. A small decision that she had no idea would soon change everything. The drive to Chicago O'Hare International Airport was quiet and dark. The streets were mostly empty at this hour, the city still sleeping while she made her way to work. She drove in silence, her mind already running through the details of today's flight. Flight 1247, departing at 7:15 in the morning, destination Los Angeles. It was a routine flight, one she had done dozens of times before. Full passenger load today. 287 people who would be trusting her with their lives for the next 4 hours. She thought about all the times she had been questioned, doubted, and underestimated throughout her career. When she first started as a flight attendant at 22, passengers would often mistake her for cleaning staff. When she transitioned to pilot training at 25, instructors questioned whether she had the temperament for the job. When she earned her first officer position at 28, colleagues whispered that she had only gotten it because of diversity quotas. And when she finally became a captain at 33, after years of flawless performance, there were still those who refused to believe that a black woman could fly a commercial aircraft. 15 years in this industry, and she was still proving herself every single day. But she never complained. She never let the bitterness consume her. Instead, she channeled it into excellence. She would be so good, so undeniably competent, that no one could ever question her ability. That was her father's legacy. That was her promise to him. Denise arrived at the airport and made her way to the crew room. The familiar smell of coffee and the hum of fluorescent lights greeting her. Several other crew members were already there, preparing for their flights. She spotted Nathan Rivera sitting at a table, reviewing flight plans on his tablet. He looked up when she walked in and immediately stood, a warm smile spreading across his face. "Good morning, Captain Harper," he said, respect evident in his voice. Nathan was her first officer today, a 34-year-old Hispanic man with 7 years of flying experience. They had flown together many times before, and he was one of the few colleagues she genuinely trusted. He never questioned her authority, never made snide comments, never treated her differently because of her race or gender. He simply respected her as a pilot and as a person. "Good morning, Nathan," she replied, setting down her bag. "How's the weather looking?" Nathan pulled up the meteorological data on his tablet. "Clear skies all the way to LA. Visibility is excellent. Wind conditions are favorable. Should be a smooth flight." He paused, scrolling through more information. "Full passenger manifest today, 287 souls. And I heard we have some VIPs on board. A couple of executives from some tech company, I think." Denise nodded, reviewing the information herself. "Sounds good. Let's go through the pre-flight checklist." They spent the next 15 minutes going over everything. Fuel levels, aircraft maintenance reports, weather patterns, flight path, emergency procedures. Nathan was thorough and professional, exactly what she expected from him. When they finished, he gathered his things and stood up. "I'll head to the aircraft and start the exterior inspection," he said. "Meet you there in about 20 minutes. Denise glanced at her watch. "Sounds good. I need to change, and then I'll be right behind you." She made her way to the crew changing room to switch from her coat into her full uniform jacket. The room was empty, giving her a moment of quiet before the chaos of the day began. She adjusted her uniform one final time, checked her appearance in the mirror, and grabbed her bag. That was when she realized her captain's badge was still tucked inside instead of pinned to her chest. She made a mental note to put it on once she got to the gate. As she left the crew area, she was informed that the usual crew passage to Gate B-27 was temporarily closed due to maintenance work. She would need to go through the passenger terminal instead. It was an inconvenience, but not unusual. These things happened sometimes. She adjusted her route and headed toward the gate, walking with the confident stride of someone who had done this thousands of times before. She had no idea that the next 10 minutes would change her life forever. At Gate B-27, a man named Bradley Thornton was starting his morning shift. He was 45 years old, with graying hair and a permanent scowl that seemed etched into his features. He had worked as a gate agent at O'Hare for 20 years, and he took great pride in what he called his instincts. He believed he could spot trouble from a mile away, could identify suspicious individuals just by looking at them. His colleagues knew him as strict and sometimes difficult, but management had never formally disciplined him despite 7 separate complaints of discriminatory behavior over the years. Those complaints had been quietly filed away, never investigated, never addressed. Bradley stood at his station, scanning the growing crowd of passengers waiting to board Flight 1247. His eyes moved across faces, making judgments, forming opinions based on nothing more than appearance. When he spotted Denise Harper walking toward the gate, something shifted in his expression. He saw a black woman, in what appeared to be a pilot's uniform, but without a visible badge. His mind immediately jumped to conclusions. Suspicion clouded his judgment. His prejudice took over. He stepped away from his station, positioning himself directly in her path. In his mind, he was about to catch an imposter. In reality, he was about to make the biggest mistake of his career. Denise approached Gate B27 with purpose in her step, her mind already focused on the tasks ahead. The pre-flight briefing with Nathan, the final equipment checks, the passenger boarding process, and then the familiar routine of taking her seat in the cockpit. She had done this countless times, and today should have been no different. But as she neared the gate entrance, a figure stepped directly into her path, blocking her way. Bradley Thornton stood before her with his arms crossed, his expression a mixture of suspicion and authority. He was not particularly tall, but he positioned himself in a way that demanded attention, that asserted dominance. His eyes traveled over her from head to toe, taking in her uniform, her face, her dark skin, and making calculations that had nothing to do with actual security protocols. "Stop right there," he said, his voice carrying a cold edge that immediately set Denise on alert. "I'm going to need to see some identification." Denise paused, maintaining her composure despite the sudden interruption. She had dealt with situations like this before, moments where her presence was questioned, where her authority was challenged simply because of how she looked. She knew how to handle it. Stay calm. Be professional. Do not give them any reason to escalate. "Good morning," she said, her voice steady and polite. "I'm crew for Flight 1247. I need to get to the aircraft." Bradley's eyes narrowed. "Crew? What kind of crew?" "I'm part of the flight deck crew," Denise replied, reaching into her bag for her airline identification. "Here is my ID." She handed him the card, watching as he examined it with an intensity that seemed far beyond routine. He held it up to the light, compared the photo to her face multiple times, turned it over to check the back. His scrutiny was excessive, and Denise felt a familiar knot forming in her stomach. This was not standard procedure. This was something else entirely. As Bradley continued his inspection, Denise noticed movement in her peripheral vision. A white man in a pilot's uniform approached the gate from another direction. Bradley barely glanced at him before nodding and stepping aside. "Good morning, Captain," Bradley said to the man. "Have a good flight." The pilot walked through without breaking stride, without showing identification, without any of the scrutiny that Denise was currently experiencing. A moment later, a young white woman in a flight attendant's uniform approached. Again, Bradley smiled, stepped aside, and wished her a pleasant day. No ID check, no questions, no suspicion. She passed through effortlessly while Denise remained standing there, her credentials still in Bradley's hands. The contrast was stark and unmistakable. Denise felt anger beginning to rise in her chest, but she forced it down. She had learned long ago that displaying anger in situations like this only made things worse, only gave people like Bradley an excuse to call her aggressive or threatening. So she maintained her composure, even as the injustice burned inside her. Bradley finally looked up from her ID, but instead of handing it back and letting her through, he shook his head slowly. "This could be fake," he said, his voice dripping with accusation. "We've had problems with counterfeit credentials. I'm going to need to verify this further." "That ID is not fake," Denise said, her patience wearing thin but her voice still controlled. "I have been flying for this airline for 15 years. I am the captain of Flight 1247, and I need to get to my aircraft. Bradley's eyebrows rose in exaggerated disbelief. Captain? You. He let out a small laugh, the sound dismissive and cruel. I've worked at this airport for 20 years. I've seen a lot of pilots come through here. And I've never seen. He paused, choosing his words with deliberate care. Someone like you as a captain. The words hung in the air between them, their meaning unmistakable. Someone like you. Not someone with your credentials, or someone with your experience. Someone like you. The implication was clear. He had never seen a black woman as a captain, and he did not believe it was possible. Denise felt her heart pounding, but she kept her expression neutral. What exactly do you mean by someone like me? She asked, wanting him to say the words out loud, to make his prejudice explicit. Bradley shifted uncomfortably, perhaps realizing he had said too much. I just mean, we can never be too careful. Security is important. I'm sure you understand. He still held her ID, making no move to return it. I understand that you are preventing a pilot from reaching her aircraft, Denise said, her voice firm. I understand that you let 2 crew members pass without checking their credentials at all. And I understand that the only difference between me and them is the color of my skin. Bradley's face hardened. Are you accusing me of something? I am stating facts, Denise replied. Now please return my identification and let me do my job. Instead of complying, Bradley turned away from her and reached for his radio. I'm calling my supervisor. We need to verify this situation further. He pressed the button and spoke into the device. This is Bradley at Gate B-27. I have a suspicious individual claiming to be flight crew, requesting supervisor assistance. Suspicious individual. The words stung more than Denise expected. 15 years of service, over 12,000 flight hours, an impeccable safety record, and to this man, she was nothing more than a suspicious individual. She thought of her father, who had faced far worse discrimination during his time in the Air Force. She thought of all the barriers she had overcome, all the doubts she had silenced, all the excellence she had achieved. And yet here she was, standing at a gate in her own airline's uniform, being treated like a criminal. Around them, passengers waiting to board the flight began to take notice of the commotion. A few turned their heads, curious about what was happening. Others pretended not to see, uncomfortable with the tension that was building. But one woman in particular was watching very closely. Gloria Washington was 67 years old, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant twist and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She sat in the priority boarding area, a leather briefcase at her feet and a book open in her lap, though she had stopped reading several minutes ago. Gloria had spent 40 years as a civil rights attorney, fighting discrimination in courtrooms across the country. She had seen injustice in all its forms, and she recognized it immediately when she saw it happening in front of her. Nearby, a young boy named Jaden sat beside his mother, leafing through a picture book about airplanes. He was 9 years old, with bright eyes and an infectious enthusiasm that his mother adored. He had been talking about this flight for weeks, excited about visiting his grandmother in Los Angeles, but now his attention was drawn away from his book, toward the gate, where a woman in a pilot's uniform was being questioned and detained. "Mama," Jaden whispered, tugging at his mother's sleeve. "Why are they stopping that lady?" His mother, a woman named Patricia, glanced toward the gate with a concerned expression. "I don't know, baby," she said softly. "Just read your book." But Jaden kept watching, his young mind trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The lady was dressed like a pilot. She looked professional and important, so why was that man being so mean to her? Denise checked her watch and felt a surge of urgency. It was now 6:50 in the morning, 25 minutes until scheduled departure. Nathan was probably already in the cockpit, wondering where she was. The passengers needed to board. The ground crew needed their final instructions. And she was stuck here, arguing with a gate agent who refused to believe she could be a pilot. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw Nathan's name on the screen. "Captain, where are you?" His voice came through, tinged with concern. "Everything's ready here, we're just waiting on you." "I'm at the gate," Denise said, keeping her voice low. "There's a situation. The gate agent is refusing to let me through." There was a pause on the other end. Refusing? Why? Denise glanced at Bradley, who was still speaking into his radio. "I think you can guess why." Nathan's voice hardened. "Do you need me to come down there?" "Not yet," Denise replied. "I'll handle it. But you might want to inform the tower that we could be looking at a delay." She ended the call and turned her attention back to Bradley, who had finished his radio conversation and was looking at her with renewed suspicion. "My supervisor is on her way," he announced, as if this were some kind of victory. "You'll wait here until she arrives." "How long will that be?" Denise asked. "I have a flight to command." Bradley shrugged, clearly unconcerned about the schedule. "As long as it takes. Security comes first." Denise took a deep breath, centering herself. She had faced obstacles before, countless times. She had always overcome them. This would be no different. But as the minutes ticked by and more passengers gathered to watch the spectacle, she could not shake the feeling that this encounter was going to leave a mark far deeper than any she had experienced before. Margaret Collins arrived at Gate B-27 with the air of someone who considered themselves indispensable. She was 52 years old, with carefully styled blonde hair and a permanent expression of mild annoyance that suggested the world consistently failed to meet her standards. As the shift supervisor for Terminal B, she wielded her authority like a shield, protecting her employees regardless of their actions. In her 20 years of management, she had developed a reputation for backing her staff no matter what. A loyalty that some called admirable and others called dangerous. She strode toward Bradley with purpose, her heels clicking against the polished floor. "What's the situation here?" she demanded, her eyes scanning the scene before settling on Denise. Bradley stood up straighter, clearly relieved to have backup. "This woman claims to be a captain for our airline," he said, gesturing toward Denise with barely concealed disdain. "But I have concerns about the authenticity of her credentials. She wasn't wearing her badge when she approached, and her story doesn't add up." Margaret turned her attention to Denise, her gaze appraising and cold. She took in the uniform, the posture, the confidence. But instead of seeing a fellow professional, she seemed to see only a problem to be managed. "May I see your identification?" she asked, extending her hand. Denise retrieved her ID from where Bradley had finally set it on the counter. She handed it to Margaret along with her pilot's license and her Atlantic Airways employee badge. "Captain Denise Harper," she said, her voice steady despite the frustration building inside her. "I have been with this airline for 15 years. Flight 1247 is my assignment today, and my first officer is currently in the cockpit waiting for me." Margaret examined the documents with the same excessive scrutiny that Bradley had displayed. She held the pilot's license up to the light, compared the photos multiple times, even ran her finger along the edges as if checking for signs of forgery. The inspection was theatrically thorough, designed more to intimidate than to actually verify. These appeared to be legitimate, Margaret finally admitted, but her tone suggested this conclusion disappointed her. However, she paused dramatically, handing the documents back to Denise. "Bradley is correct to be cautious. We can never be too careful in these times. Airport security is paramount." "I understand the importance of security," Denise replied, struggling to keep her composure. "But this is not a security issue. This is a discrimination issue." Your employee stopped me specifically because of how I look. He allowed 2 white crew members to pass without any verification whatsoever. Margaret's expression hardened. That's a very serious accusation, she said, her voice dropping to a warning tone. Bradley is one of our most experienced agents. He has been with this airport for 2 decades. Are you suggesting that he is a racist? Denise met her gaze unflinchingly. I am suggesting that he treated me differently than he treated my white colleagues. I am suggesting that he questioned my credentials when he did not question theirs. And I am suggesting that the only apparent difference between us is the color of my skin. You can call that whatever you want. Bradley stepped forward, his face reddening with anger. This is ridiculous. I was just doing my job. If anything is suspicious here, it is her attitude. A real captain would understand the importance of security protocols. A real captain. Denise shot back, her patience finally beginning to crack. Would not be standing here arguing while her flight is being delayed. A real captain would be in the cockpit right now, preparing to safely transport 287 passengers to Los Angeles. Margaret held up her hand, silencing both of them. Enough, she said. She pulled out her radio and spoke into it. This is Collins at B-27. I need security assistance. We have an individual who may require further verification. Denise stared at her in disbelief. You just confirmed my documents are legitimate. Why are you calling security? Margaret's smile was thin and cold. As I said, we can never be too careful. Security will conduct an independent verification. It's standard procedure. But Denise knew it was not standard procedure. She had walked through gates thousands of times in her career. She had shown her credentials countless times. Never, not once, had she been subjected to anything like this. Never had her documents been questioned after being verified by a supervisor. Never had security been called to independently verify her identity. This was not procedure. This was prejudice, dressed up in the language of policy. The crowd around them had grown significantly. Passengers waiting for Flight 1247 stood in clusters, watching the confrontation with varying degrees of interest and concern. Some looked uncomfortable, averting their eyes whenever Denise glanced in their direction. Others openly stared, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outrage, and many had their phones out, recording every moment of the encounter. Gloria Washington rose from her seat, leaving her book behind. She walked toward the gate with measured steps, her civil rights attorney instincts fully activated. 40 years in the courtroom had taught her exactly when she was witnessing discrimination, and this was one of the clearest cases she had ever seen. She stopped a few feet away from the counter, close enough to hear everything but far enough to avoid appearing confrontational. "Excuse me," Gloria said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "I couldn't help but notice this situation. What exactly seems to be the problem here?" Bradley turned toward her with irritation. "Mom, please step back. This is a security matter that doesn't concern you." Gloria did not move. "I am a passenger on this flight," she said, "which means any security matter at this gate concerns me directly, and what I have witnessed for the past 10 minutes appears to be a case of racial profiling against a crew member attempting to perform her duties." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "And who exactly are you?" Gloria reached into her pocket and produced a business card, handing it to Margaret with a practiced motion. Gloria Washington, civil rights attorney, retired, former board member of the NAACP Chicago chapter, current member of the American Civil Liberties Union. The color drained slightly from Margaret's face as she read the card. Bradley, too, seemed to lose some of his earlier bravado. The name Gloria Washington carried weight in Chicago legal circles, and her reputation preceded her. "Mrs. Washington," Margaret said, her tone shifting to something approaching politeness. "I assure you, this is simply a routine security check. We are not discriminating against anyone." "Then explain to me." Gloria replied, her voice sharp as a blade, "why I watched two white crew members walk through this gate without being asked for any identification, while this woman has now been detained for nearly 15 minutes despite presenting valid credentials. Explain to me why her documents have been verified multiple times, yet security has still been called. Explain to me how any of that constitutes routine." Before Margaret could respond, young Jaden's voice cut through the tension. "Mama, why are they being mean to the pilot lady?" Patricia tried to quiet her son, but Jaden pulled away from her and stepped forward, his young face set with determination. "Shay's wearing a pilot uniform," he said, pointing at Denise. "I saw it in my book. 4 stripes means she's the captain. That's the boss of the whole airplane." His innocent observation hung in the air, highlighting the absurdity of the situation. A 9-year-old child could recognize a captain's uniform, yet 2 adult airline employees refused to accept what was right in front of their eyes. Denise felt a lump form in her throat as she looked at the boy. His earnestness, his simple logic, his refusal to understand why adults were behaving so badly. It reminded her of herself at that age, when her father first took her to an air show and she declared that she would fly planes when she grew up. Some adults had laughed at her, some had patted her head condescendingly, but her father had looked her in the eye and told her she could do anything she set her mind to. "Thank you," Denise said softly to Jaden. "You're absolutely right. 4 stripes means captain." Bradley stepped between them, his voice harsh. "Someone get that kid away from here," he snapped. "This is a security situation, not show and tell." Patricia gasped at his rudeness, pulling Jaden protectively close. Other passengers murmured in disapproval. Gloria's eyes flashed with anger. The atmosphere at Gate B-27 had shifted dramatically. What had started as one agent's prejudice had become a full-scale public incident, and Bradley seemed to be the only one who did not realize he was losing. 2 uniformed airport security officers pushed through the gathering crowd, their expressions professional and alert. Officer Reynolds was a white man in his early 40s, with a muscular build and a no-nonsense demeanor developed over 15 years on the job. His partner, Officer Jackson, was a black man in his mid-30s, with intelligent eyes that seemed to assess situations quickly and accurately. They approached the gate counter, taking in the scene before them. "We received a call about a potential security concern," Officer Reynolds said, addressing Margaret. "What's the situation?" Margaret gestured toward Denise, with obvious distaste. "This individual claims to be a captain for our airline. We have concerns about the authenticity of her credentials and require independent verification." Officer Jackson's brow furrowed as he looked at Denise, taking in her uniform, her bearing, her professionalism. Something about Margaret's characterization did not sit right with him. "May I see your identification, ma'am?" he asked politely. Denise handed over her documents once again. Pilot's license, airline ID, employee badge. She had already shown them twice, had already been verified twice, and yet here she was, presenting them a 3rd time. The humiliation of it burned in her chest, but she kept her expression neutral. Officer Jackson examined the credentials carefully. Unlike Bradley and Margaret, his inspection was genuine and professional. He checked the security features on each document, compared the photographs to the woman standing before him, and cross-referenced the employee number against a database on his radio. Within 2 minutes, he had his answer. "These are all legitimate," he said, handing the documents back to Denise. He turned to Margaret with a questioning look. "Ma'am, this is a verified Atlantic Airways captain. What exactly is the concern here?" Margaret sputtered slightly. "Well, Bradley felt that something was off, and we wanted to be thorough. "I verified her credentials," Officer Jackson said firmly. "There is no security issue here." But Officer Reynolds seemed less certain. He glanced at Bradley, then at Margaret, clearly feeling some loyalty to the airline employees who had called him. "Maybe we should conduct a more detailed verification," he suggested. "Just to be safe." "More detailed than a database confirmation?" Officer Jackson asked, his voice taking on an edge. "Her employee number matches the airline system. Her pilot's license is valid with the FAA. Her photograph matches her face. What additional verification would satisfy you?" Before Reynolds could answer, Bradley inserted himself into the conversation. "I don't care what the database says," he declared. "I've worked at this airport for 20 years. I know when something isn't right. And I'm telling you, something about her story doesn't add up." Denise had reached her limit. 15 minutes of being questioned, challenged, and doubted. 15 minutes of watching her credentials be examined like evidence in a criminal case. 15 minutes of being treated like an imposter in the career she had dedicated her life to building. "Enough," she said, her voice rising with controlled anger. "I am Captain Denise Harper. I have been flying commercial aircraft for 15 years. I have logged over 12,000 flight hours. I was trained by the United States Air Force, just like my father, who was one of the first black pilots in this country's military." She stepped forward, looking directly at Bradley. "You say something doesn't add up? Let me tell you what doesn't add up. You let 2 white crew members through this gate without checking a single piece of identification. You saw me, a black woman, and immediately assumed I must be lying about who I am. You have subjected me to scrutiny that you have never applied to anyone who looks like you. That is what doesn't add up." Her voice echoed through the terminal, and heads turned throughout the boarding area. Passengers who had been pretending not to notice were now openly watching. Phones were raised, cameras were recording, and the murmur of conversation spread like wildfire. The airport public address system crackled to life. "Attention passengers. Flight 1247 to Los Angeles is experiencing a delay. Please remain in the gate area for further updates." The announcement sent a ripple of frustration through the waiting crowd. Passengers checked their watches, made phone calls, expressed their annoyance. And through it all, the irony was not lost on anyone paying attention. The flight was delayed because the captain was being prevented from reaching her aircraft by the very people who were supposed to facilitate smooth operations. Now I have to ask you something. If you believe that what Bradley did was wrong, comment number 1 right now. If you think Denise handled this situation with incredible grace under pressure, drop a like on this video. And if stories about resilience and standing up against injustice matter to you, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss content like this. Also, I want to know, have you ever witnessed discrimination like this? Have you ever been treated differently because of how you look? Share your story in the comments below. Your voice matters. What happens next changed everything. Nathan Rivera was about to enter this situation, and his arrival would prove beyond any doubt what Gloria Washington already knew, what Officer Jackson already suspected, and what Bradley Thornton refused to accept. But would the truth finally be enough to overcome Bradley's prejudice? Would Denise make it to her aircraft in time? And what consequences would this encounter have for everyone involved? Let us continue. Nathan's phone call had left him deeply unsettled. Something in Denise's voice, a tension that she rarely displayed, told him that this situation was serious. He made a quick decision. The pre-flight checklist was complete. The aircraft was ready. The most important thing now was to support his captain. He unbuckled from the cockpit and made his way down the jet bridge, through the cabin where confused passengers watched him pass, and out into the terminal. What he saw when he reached Gate B-27 made his blood boil. His captain, one of the most competent pilots he had ever flown with, stood surrounded by hostile employees and security officers. She was being questioned like a suspect, her credentials challenged despite being in full uniform. And the reason was painfully, obviously, disgustingly clear. Nathan strode forward, his first officer stripes gleaming on his shoulders. "What in the world is going on here?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Why is my captain being detained?" Nathan Rivera's sudden appearance shifted the energy at Gate B-27 immediately. He stood there in his crisp first officer uniform, 4 years of experience radiating from his confident posture and his dark eyes flashing with barely contained anger. Unlike Denise, who had been forced into a defensive position, Nathan arrived with the full weight of the cockpit behind him, a pilot coming to collect his captain. "I asked a question," Nathan repeated, his voice steady but hard. "Why is Captain Harper being detained?" Bradley stepped forward, his earlier certainty slightly shaken by the arrival of another uniformed crew member. "And who are you?" "I am First Officer Nathan Rivera," Nathan replied, pulling out his own credentials and holding them up. "I am the co-pilot of Flight 1247. I have been in the cockpit for the past 30 minutes completing pre-flight checks. And I have been waiting for my captain, who, I now discover, has been held here by you for nearly 20 minutes. He looked at Bradley with undisguised contempt. "Would you like to verify my credentials as well? Or is that scrutiny reserved only for certain people?" The implication was clear and cutting. Bradley's face reddened, but before he could respond, Margaret stepped in. "Officer Rivera, this is simply a security matter. We had concerns about credentials, and we followed protocol." "Protocol?" Nathan's voice rose incredulously. "I walked through this exact gate 25 minutes ago. No one stopped me. No one asked to see my ID. No one questioned whether I was really a pilot." He gestured toward himself. "I'm Hispanic. My skin isn't as dark as Captain Harper's, but it's certainly not white. So tell me, what exactly made you decide to stop her and not me? What was different about her that triggered your protocol?" The question hung in the air, demanding an answer that neither Bradley nor Margaret could give without incriminating themselves. Gloria Washington nodded approvingly from her position nearby, recognizing the legal trap that Nathan had just laid. He was forcing them to articulate their reasoning, and any reasoning they could offer would expose their discrimination. "We don't have to explain our security decisions," Bradley said defensively. "We have the authority to verify anyone we consider suspicious." "Suspicious based on what criteria?" Nathan pressed. "She was wearing a captain's uniform. She had proper identification. She told you exactly who she was and what flight she was commanding. What made her suspicious?" "Her credentials were in order. Her story was consistent. The only thing you could possibly have found suspicious was how she looked." Several passengers in the crowd murmured their agreement. The tide of public opinion had clearly turned against Bradley and Margaret. Even Officer Reynolds, who had initially seemed inclined to support the airline employees, was now looking uncomfortable. Officer Jackson stepped forward decisively. "I've verified Captain Harper's credentials independently," he said. "Everything checks out. She is exactly who she says she is. A 15-year veteran, captain for Atlantic Airways." He turned to Denise with respect in his voice. "Captain Harper, I apologize for this delay. You are free to proceed to your aircraft." Denise nodded, but she did not move. There was something she needed to do first. She turned to face the crowd of passengers who had been watching this entire ordeal. Some had been there from the beginning. Others had gathered as the situation escalated. All of them had witnessed her humiliation, her dignity being questioned, her identity being doubted. "My name is Captain Denise Harper," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I have been flying for 15 years. I have transported hundreds of thousands of passengers safely across this country and around the world. Today, I was stopped at this gate because a man looked at me and decided that someone who looks like me could not possibly be a pilot. She paused, letting her words sink in. But I am a pilot. I am a captain. And in a few minutes, I am going to walk onto that aircraft, take my seat in the cockpit, and fly all of you to Los Angeles. That is what I do. That is who I am. No amount of doubt, discrimination, or disrespect will ever change that. The applause started slowly, from Gloria Washington's elegant hands, and spread through the crowd like a wave. Passengers clapped, some enthusiastically, others somewhat guiltily for having watched without intervening. Young Jaden clapped the loudest of all, his face beaming with admiration. "She's so cool, Mama," he said to Patricia. "I want to be just like her when I grow up." Nathan moved to stand beside Denise, presenting a unified front. "Captain," he said formally, "your aircraft is ready for departure. Shall we?" But before Denise could respond, she turned back to Bradley. She looked at him for a long moment. Seeing the resentment and embarrassment warring on his face, he knew he had lost. The crowd knew it, his supervisor knew it, even his fellow employees knew it. But she could see that he still did not truly understand why he was wrong. "Mr. Thornton," she said, her voice quiet but carrying in the sudden silence, "I want you to remember this moment. Not because I want you to feel ashamed, but because I want you to learn something. When you looked at me, you saw a black woman, and you assumed the worst. You assumed I could not possibly be who I said I was. You assumed that someone who looks like me does not belong in a captain's uniform." She stepped closer to him. "There are children watching what happened here today. There is a little boy over there who dreams of being a pilot. What lesson do you think he just learned? What did you teach him about his own possibilities? About how the world will treat him when he dares to reach for something great?" Bradley had no answer. He stood there, mouth slightly open, unable to form words. Denise reached into her bag and pulled out her captain's badge, the one she had neglected to pin on earlier. She held it up so he could see it clearly, then slowly and deliberately affixed it to her chest, directly over her heart. "I am Captain Denise Harper," she repeated, "and I have a flight to command." She turned and walked toward the jet bridge, Nathan falling into step beside her. Behind them, the crowd parted respectfully, and as she passed, passengers reached out to touch her arm, to offer words of encouragement and support. "You showed him, Captain," one elderly gentleman said. "We're proud to fly with you," a young businesswoman added. "Can I get your autograph later?" Jaden called out, causing a ripple of laughter through the tense atmosphere. Denise smiled, the first genuine smile she had managed since this ordeal began. "Come find me when we land," she told the boy. Make sure you get something special." As she disappeared down the jet bridge, Gloria Washington approached Bradley and Margaret with a business card in her hand. "I would advise you both to consult with legal counsel," she said, her voice pleasant but her eyes hard. "What I witnessed today was a textbook case of racial discrimination. I have full video documentation from multiple angles, and I intend to pursue this matter through every available channel." Margaret took the card with a trembling hand. Bradley simply stared at the floor, the reality of his situation finally beginning to sink in. Officer Jackson lingered for a moment, looking at his partner Reynolds. "Let's go," he said. "Our work here is done." But as he walked away, he pulled out his personal phone and began typing notes. He had witnessed something today that he would not soon forget, and he intended to make sure the right people heard about it. Inside the jet bridge, away from the watching crowd, Denise allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. She stopped walking and leaned against the wall, closing her eyes and taking several deep breaths. The adrenaline that had sustained her through the confrontation was beginning to fade, replaced by a profound exhaustion that went beyond the physical. Nathan stood beside her, silent and supportive. He understood without being told that she needed a moment to collect herself. 15 years, Denise finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. 15 years. I've been doing this job. And it still happens. It still happens every single time. Nathan shook his head slowly. I've flown with you for 3 years, he said. I've watched you handle emergencies that would have panicked most pilots. I've seen you make split-second decisions that saved lives. You are one of the best captains I've ever worked with, and I would trust you with my life without hesitation. Denise opened her eyes and looked at him. Thank you, Nathan. That means more than you know. It shouldn't have to be said, he replied. Your competence should be obvious to anyone with eyes. The fact that people like that, he gestured back toward the gate, unable to find words sufficient to express his disgust. The fact that people like that still exist, that they still have the power to humiliate someone like you, it makes me sick. Denise straightened up, squaring her shoulders. But they don't have power over me, she said, her voice strengthening. Not really. They can delay me. They can embarrass me. They can make me feel small for a few minutes. But they cannot stop me from being who I am. They cannot take away my skills, my experience, my right to be here. She started walking again, her stride more confident now. My father faced worse, she continued. In the 1960s, he wasn't just questioned at gates. He was denied service at restaurants. He was refused housing. He was threatened for daring to wear a military uniform while being black. And he never let any of it stop him. He flew until the day he retired, and he did it with excellence and dignity. They reached the aircraft door, and Denise paused with her hand on the frame. I'm going to do the same. And someday, maybe, little boys like the one back there won't have to face what we face. Maybe they'll walk through gates without being questioned. Maybe they'll be seen as pilots first, and black people second. Or not as black people at all. Just as people. Nathan smiled. That's a future worth fighting for, Captain. Then let's go fly this plane, Denise said. We've kept our passengers waiting long enough. She stepped into the aircraft, transforming instantly from the woman who had just endured public humiliation into the professional commander of a multi-million-dollar aircraft. The transition was seamless. A testament to her years of training and discipline. Whatever turmoil she felt inside, her passengers would never know. They would see only competence, confidence, and calm authority. As she made her way up the aisle toward the cockpit, something unexpected happened. A passenger sitting in first class, a middle-aged white man in an expensive suit, stood up as she approached. Captain Harper, he asked. Denise paused, unsure what to expect. Yes. The man extended his hand. I saw what happened at the gate. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that happened to you. And I'm sorry I didn't speak up. I should have said something. We all should have. Denise shook his hand, surprised by the gesture. Thank you, she said. That means a lot. Similar sentiments followed her all the way to the cockpit door. Passengers who had witnessed the confrontation expressed their support, their admiration, their solidarity. Some apologized for not intervening. Others thanked her for standing her ground. All of them seemed genuinely moved by what they had witnessed. When Denise finally settled into the captain's seat and began running through her pre-flight checks, she felt something she had not expected to feel: hope. Yes, there were people like Bradley Thornton in the world. Yes, discrimination was still a daily reality. But there were also people like Gloria Washington, willing to use their expertise to fight injustice. There were people like Nathan Rivera, who stood by their colleagues without hesitation. There were even people like that man in first class, who recognized their own failure to act and committed to doing better. Maybe change was possible. Maybe, one encounter at a time, one confrontation at a time, one moment of standing tall at a time, the world could become better. Nathan settled into the first officer's seat beside her. "Ready, Captain." Denise smiled and reached for her headset. "Let's fly." The Boeing 777 pushed back from the gate precisely 32 minutes behind schedule. Air traffic control had been understanding, given the unusual circumstances of the delay, and had slotted them into the departure queue without significant additional waiting. As the massive aircraft taxied toward the runway, Denise felt the familiar calm settling over her, the focused tranquility that always came when she was at the controls. Atlantic 1247. Cleared for takeoff runway 27. Right, came the controller's voice through her headset. Cleared for takeoff runway 27. Right, Atlantic 1247. Denise confirmed. She glanced at Nathan. "Let's do this." She advanced the throttles smoothly, feeling the engines respond with their characteristic surge of power. The aircraft accelerated down the runway, faster and faster, the ground blurring beneath them. At precisely the calculated speed, she pulled back on the yoke, and the nose lifted toward the sky. The wheels left the ground, and suddenly they were airborne, climbing steadily through the crisp Chicago morning. "Positive rate," Nathan announced. "Gear up." Denise retracted the landing gear and continued the climb, following the departure procedure precisely. Within minutes, they had reached their cruising altitude of 37,000 feet, and the seatbelt sign was turned off. The aircraft settled into its rhythm, the autopilot engaged, and the immediate demands of takeoff gave way to the steady monitoring that characterized most of a pilot's actual flying time. Denise picked up the intercom handset. She had been thinking about what she wanted to say to the passengers, and now was the time. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen." Her voice came through the cabin speakers. "This is Captain Denise Harper speaking. First, I want to apologize for the delay in our departure this morning. I know many of you have connections to make and schedules to keep." She paused, considering her next words carefully. "Some of you witnessed what occurred at the gate before boarding. I want to thank those of you who offered words of support and encouragement. Your kindness meant more than you know." Another pause. "I also want to make you a promise. For the next 3 hours and 45 minutes, you are in my care. My co-pilot Officer Rivera and I have over 20 years of combined experience between us. We have flown thousands of flights and transported hundreds of thousands of passengers safely to their destinations. Today will be no different. I am going to get you to Los Angeles safely, comfortably, and with as little turbulence as the weather will allow." She smiled, even though the passengers could not see it. "So please, sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight. We'll have you on the ground in Los Angeles before you know it. Thank you for flying with Atlantic Airways." As she replaced the handset, applause broke out in the cabin. It started somewhere in the back and rippled forward, growing in intensity until it filled the entire aircraft. Denise closed her eyes briefly, touched by the response. She had been flying for 15 years, and she could count on one hand the number of times passengers had applauded a routine announcement. But this was not routine. Today was different. Today, she had become more than just a voice on the intercom. She had become a symbol of resilience, of dignity, of the right to be seen for who you truly are. The flight progressed smoothly as they crossed the country, leaving the Midwest behind and passing over the Great Plains. The sky was impossibly blue at this altitude, the earth below a patchwork of brown and green. Denise loved this view, the perspective it gave her. From up here, the problems of the ground seemed small and distant. Up here, she was simply a pilot, doing what she loved, doing what she had trained her entire life to do. About 2 hours into the flight, the cabin intercom buzzed. "Captain Harper. This is Angela, the lead flight attendant. There's a young passenger who was hoping to see the cockpit. Has been talking about you non-stop since we took off." Denise exchanged a glance with Nathan, who smiled. "I think I know who that might be," she said. A few minutes later, there was a knock on the cockpit door. Angela escorted young Jaden inside, his eyes wide with wonder as he took in the instrument panels, the windscreen with its vast view of the sky, and the two uniformed pilots at the controls. "Captain Harper," he whispered, as if he could not quite believe he was actually in the cockpit of a real airplane. "Hello, Jaden," Denise said, swiveling her seat slightly to face him. "I heard you wanted to see where the magic happens." Jaden nodded eagerly, words temporarily failing him. His gaze darted from one instrument to another, trying to take everything in at once. Behind him, his mother, Patricia, stood in the doorway, watching with tears in her eyes. "Come closer," Denise said gently. "I'll show you around." She spent the next 10 minutes explaining the cockpit to the fascinated boy. She showed him the primary flight display, explaining how it told her exactly where the airplane was in the sky. She pointed out the thrust levers, the autopilot controls, the navigation systems. She let him look out the windscreen at the curvature of the Earth, visible on the horizon. "When I was about your age," Denise told him, "my father took me to an air show. I saw these big, beautiful airplanes doing amazing things, and I told him right then that I was going to be a pilot when I grew up." "Did he believe you?" Jaden asked. "He believed in me more than anyone else ever has," Denise said. "When other people told me that girls couldn't be pilots, or that black people couldn't be pilots, my father told me I could do anything I set my mind to. He was a pilot too, you know. One of the first black pilots in the Air Force." Jaden's eyes widened. "Really? Really? And he taught me the most important lesson I ever learned. It doesn't matter what other people think you can or can't do. What matters is what you believe about yourself. If you believe you can fly, then nothing can keep you on the ground." She reached into her flight bag and pulled out something she always kept there. A small pair of pilot's wings, the kind that airlines used to give to children who visited the cockpit. She had been carrying a few of these for years, handing them out to kids who showed a particular interest in aviation. "These are for you," she said, pressing the wings into Jaden's palm. "Every time you look at them, I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember that you were in the cockpit of a real airplane, with a real captain, and that captain looked just like you." Jaden clutched the wings to his chest, his face glowing with joy. "I'm going to be a pilot," he declared. "I'm going to be just like you, Captain Harper. I promise. I believe you," Denise said. "And when you get your wings, your real wings, I want you to find me. I want to be there to congratulate you." Patricia stepped forward, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Captain," she said. "You have no idea what this means to him, what it means to both of us." "I think I do," Denise replied softly. "Someone did the same for me, a long time ago. This is how we keep the dream alive. We pass it on." After Jaden returned to his seat, clutching his pilot's wings like the most precious treasure in the world, Nathan looked at Denise with something like awe. "That kid is going to remember this day for the rest of his life," he said. "That's the point," Denise replied. "That's the whole point." The Boeing 777 touched down at Los Angeles International Airport with its characteristic grace, the wheels meeting the runway, in a perfect landing that Denise executed with the same precision she brought to everything she did. As the aircraft taxied toward the gate, she felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond the routine completion of another flight. "Nice landing, Captain," Nathan commented, as he always did. "Thank you, Officer Rivera," she replied, completing the post-landing checklist. But as the aircraft approached the gate, something unusual became apparent. Through the cockpit windows, Denise could see a gathering crowd at the terminal. At first, she assumed it was just normal airport activity. Then she noticed the cameras, television cameras, news crews, reporters holding microphones. What in the world? Nathan muttered, leaning forward for a better look. Denise felt her stomach drop. Somehow, word of what had happened in Chicago had spread. The videos that passengers had recorded, the posts they had shared on social media, had gone viral during the 4-hour flight. While she had been cruising at 37,000 feet, showing young Jaden the cockpit and promising to deliver her passengers safely, a firestorm had been brewing on the ground. The aircraft came to a stop at the gate, and the jet bridge extended. Normally, Denise would complete her shutdown procedures, gather her belongings, and walk off the plane with minimal fanfare. Today, she suspected, would be very different. Her phone, which she had kept off during the flight, buzzed incessantly as she powered it on. Notifications flooded the screen, dozens of missed calls, hundreds of messages. Her name was trending on Twitter under the hashtag Justice for Captain Harper. News outlets across the country were covering the story. Her face was on CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, and every major network in between. Nathan let out a low whistle as he looked at his own phone. "Captain, you're famous. I'm not sure that's a good thing," Denise said, trying to absorb the enormity of what had happened. Among the notifications was a voicemail from the CEO of Atlantic Airways himself, Robert Matthews. His message was brief and urgent. "Captain Harper, please call me as soon as you land. I want to personally apologize for what you experienced, and I want to discuss how we can make this right." There were also messages from several news organizations requesting interviews, from the NAACP expressing support, from pilot associations offering solidarity, and from dozens of former colleagues and friends who had seen the coverage and wanted to check on her. Denise took a deep breath. She had wanted to stand up against injustice. She had wanted to make a statement, but she had not anticipated this level of attention, this level of scrutiny. Her private humiliation had become a public spectacle, and now she would have to decide how to navigate the consequences. The cabin door opened, and immediately the sound of shouting reporters filtered through. "Captain Harper! Captain Harper, can you give us a statement? How do you feel about what happened? Will you be pressing charges?" Denise straightened her uniform and composed her expression. Whatever she did next would be seen by millions of people. Whatever she said would be analyzed, dissected, and interpreted in 1,000 different ways. This was no longer just about her personal experience. This had become something larger, something that represented the experiences of countless Black professionals who faced similar discrimination every day. She stepped out of the cockpit and made her way through the cabin. Passengers who had not yet deplaned stood and applauded as she passed. Some reached out to shake her hand or pat her shoulder. "You showed them, Captain," one woman said. "We're so proud of you," said another. At the aircraft door, Denise paused. She could see the crowd waiting for her. Reporters, cameras, airport security trying to maintain order. She could also see Gloria Washington standing to one side, her phone pressed to her ear, clearly coordinating something. And she could see representatives from Atlantic Airways, looking nervous and unsure. Nathan came up beside her. "You don't have to do this alone," he said. "I'll stand with you." Denise nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Nathan. But this is something I need to do myself." She stepped onto the jet bridge and walked toward the terminal. As she emerged into the bright lights and clicking cameras, she felt a strange calm settle over her. This was her moment. Not a moment she had chosen, but a moment that had been thrust upon her. And she would meet it with the same grace and strength that she brought to every challenge in her life. The first reporter to reach her thrust a microphone toward her face. "Captain Harper, America wants to know, how do you feel about the way you were treated today?" Denise looked directly into the camera, knowing that millions of people would see this moment. "I feel disappointed," she said. "Not just for myself, but for every black professional who has experienced something similar. What happened to me today happens to black doctors, black lawyers, black executives every single day. Our credentials are questioned. Our competence is doubted. Our right to occupy positions of authority is challenged. And it has to stop. Will you be taking legal action?" Another reporter shouted. "I am exploring all of my options," Denise replied. "But more importantly, I want to see systemic change, not just at this airline, but across the entire industry. We need better training. We need accountability. We need a culture that values people for their abilities, not their appearance." The gate agent, Bradley Thornton, has been suspended pending investigation, a third reporter announced. "Do you have anything to say to him?" Denise paused, considering the question carefully. "I hope that Mr. Thornton uses this experience as an opportunity for growth. I hope he examines the biases that led him to treat me the way he did, and I hope he commits to doing better. But I also hope that the airline examines why someone with his history of complaints was allowed to remain in a customer-facing position for so long. This is not just about one individual. This is about systemic failure." The questions continued, a barrage of microphones and cameras, but Denise had said what she needed to say. She excused herself and made her way through the crowd, eventually reaching the airline representatives who had been waiting anxiously nearby. Within the hour, she was in a private conference room at the Atlantic Airways Operations Center. CEO Robert Matthews sat across from her, his expression a mixture of shame and determination. "Captain Harper," he began, "on behalf of the entire Atlantic Airways family, I want to offer my deepest, most sincere apologies for what you experienced. What happened was inexcusable, and it should never have occurred." Denise nodded, accepting the apology but waiting for what came next. Matthews continued. "I've already ordered a complete review of our hiring and training practices for all customer-facing employees. We're implementing mandatory anti-bias training across the company. We're installing additional monitoring at all gate areas. And we're establishing a clear, accessible process for employees to report discrimination without fear of retaliation." "That's a good start," Denise said. "But I want to be involved in shaping these changes. I want to help ensure that they're not just performative gestures, but genuine systemic improvements." Matthews looked at her with surprise, then respect. "Would you be willing to serve as an advisor? We could create a new position, something like Chief Diversity Consultant for Operations." "I'll consider it," Denise said. "But right now, I want to talk about the immediate consequences. What's happening with Bradley Thornton and Margaret Collins?" Matthews shifted uncomfortably. "Thornton has been suspended without pay. Collins is on administrative leave. The investigation is ongoing. But I'll be frank with you, Captain. Given what we've seen on video, and given Thornton's history of similar complaints that should have been addressed years ago, I don't expect either of them to remain with the company." 7 complaints, Denise said quietly. "I heard there were 7 prior complaints against Thornton, all swept under the rug. How does that happen?" Matthews shook his head, genuine shame on his face. "It shouldn't happen. It's a failure of leadership at multiple levels, and I take responsibility for creating a culture where that was possible." The meeting continued for another hour, as they discussed specifics, timelines, and accountability measures. By the time Denise left the operations center, she felt something she had not expected to feel: cautious optimism. Real change might actually come from this terrible experience. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was Gloria Washington. "Captain Harper." Gloria's voice came through, warm and professional. "I've been fielding calls from civil rights organizations all afternoon. Everyone wants to support you, and if you're interested, I'd like to discuss the possibility of legal action, not just for yourself, but to establish precedent that will protect others." "I'd like that," Denise said. "Can we meet tomorrow?" "I'll be there," Gloria replied. "And Captain, what you did today matters. You stood your ground with dignity and grace. You represented all of us who have ever been told we don't belong. Thank you." Denise ended the call and stood for a moment, looking out at the Los Angeles skyline. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Somewhere out there, a little boy named Jaden was probably showing his grandmother the pilot's wings she had given him, telling her about the captain who looked like him and promised he could be anything he wanted to be. That was what mattered. Not the fame, not the interviews, not even the apologies and policy changes. What mattered was the next generation of Black children who would see this story and believe a little more strongly in their own possibilities. What mattered was the door she was helping to open, the path she was helping to clear. Her father had been one of the first. She would not be the last. 6 months had passed since the incident at Gate B-27. The world had continued to turn, news cycles had moved on, and new controversies had captured the public's attention. But the changes that began on that cold Chicago morning had only grown and deepened in the months that followed. Denise Harper stood backstage at the National Pilots Association annual conference in Atlanta, Georgia. Through the curtain, she could hear the murmur of the crowd. Over 2,000 aviation professionals from across the country gathered to celebrate excellence in their field. In a few moments, she would walk onto that stage to accept the Pioneer of the Year award, an honor previously given to test pilots, aviation inventors, and trailblazers who had transformed the industry. Her hands were steady as she reviewed her notes. She had given many speeches in the past 6 months, spoken to countless reporters, testified before a congressional subcommittee on transportation. But this one felt different. This was not about defending herself or demanding justice. This was about celebrating how far they had come and inspiring others to go further. "Ready, Captain." The conference coordinator appeared at her elbow. "Ready," Denise replied. She walked onto the stage as the audience rose to their feet, applause washing over her like a wave. The ovation continued for a full minute, then 2, as people throughout the auditorium stood and clapped and some wiped tears from their eyes. Denise saw faces she recognized. Colleagues from Atlantic Airways, fellow pilots who had reached out with support, and new friends she had made through this unexpected journey. In the front row, she spotted a familiar face. Young Jaden sat between his mother Patricia and grandmother, wearing a child's pilot costume and clutching the wings she had given him on the flight. His smile was the brightest thing in the room. When the applause finally subsided and the audience resumed their seats, Denise approached the podium. "6 months ago," she began, "I was stopped at a gate in my own airline's uniform and told that I couldn't possibly be who I said I was. A man looked at me and saw only my skin color. He saw a black woman and assumed I was lying about being a pilot. He could not reconcile his prejudices with the reality standing right in front of him." She paused, letting the words settle. "But I stand here today not to dwell on that painful moment, but to celebrate what has grown from it. Since that day, Atlantic Airways has implemented comprehensive anti-bias training for all employees. They have installed monitoring systems at every gate. They have created clear channels for reporting discrimination. And they have appointed me as Senior Advisor for Diversity and Inclusion in Operations." More applause, which Denise acknowledged with a nod. But the changes go beyond one airline. Airlines across the country have re-examined their practices. Flight schools have reported a 300% increase in applications from Black women. And young children everywhere are seeing faces that look like theirs in cockpits, in control towers, and at the helm of the most powerful machines humanity has ever built. She looked directly at Jaden in the front row. There's a young man here today who told me 6 months ago that he wanted to be a pilot. He said he wanted to be just like me. Well, Jaden, I want you to know something. You don't have to be just like me. You can be even better. You can fly higher, go further, achieve more. The sky is not the limit for you. The sky is just the beginning. Jaden beamed, standing up in his seat and waving his pilot wings in the air. The audience laughed warmly at his enthusiasm. Denise continued, her voice growing more passionate. To everyone in this room, and to everyone watching, I want to say this. Progress is not inevitable. It doesn't happen by itself. It happens because people stand up. It happens because we refuse to accept injustice. It happens because we have the courage to say this is not right even when it would be easier to stay silent. I stood up because my father taught me to stand. He was one of the first black pilots in the Air Force. At a time when black men couldn't eat at the same restaurants as their white colleagues. He flew anyway. He excelled anyway. He paved the way for me, and now I am paving the way for others. She gripped the podium, her final words carrying the weight of generations. This award belongs to every black pilot who came before me and faced obstacles I cannot even imagine. It belongs to every young person of color who looks up at the sky and dreams of flying. And it belongs to everyone who stands against discrimination, who speaks up against injustice, who refuses to let prejudice determine their potential. We are the pilots of our own destiny, and nothing can keep us from soaring. The audience rose again, the applause even more thunderous than before. Denise accepted the award, a beautiful crystal sculpture in the shape of wings, and held it high. Cameras flashed. People cheered, and somewhere, she knew, her father was watching and smiling. After the ceremony, as Denise made her way through the crowd of well-wishers, someone unexpected approached her. He was a young man in his early 20s, with nervous eyes and a hesitant step. "Captain Harper," he said, his voice barely audible over the noise. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" Denise nodded, stepping aside to give him some privacy. "Of course. What's your name?" "Derek," the young man said. Derek Thornton. The name hit Denise like a physical force. Thornton, the same last name as Bradley, the gate agent who had humiliated her 6 months ago. Derek seemed to read her reaction. "Yes," he said quietly. "Bradley Thornton is my father." 100 different responses flashed through Denise's mind. Anger, suspicion, the urge to walk away without another word. But something in the young man's expression gave her pause. He looked ashamed, pained, conflicted. "Why are you here, Derek?" she asked carefully. Derek took a deep breath. "I wanted to apologize. Not on my father's behalf, because he needs to do that himself. And I'm not sure he ever will. But for myself. For growing up in a house where the kind of attitudes that led to what he did were normal, for not recognizing sooner how wrong they were." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something that glinted in the light. It was a pair of student pilot's wings. "I'm training to be a pilot," Derek said. "I started after I saw what happened to you. Not in spite of it, but because of it. What you said, about children learning lessons from what they see. It made me realize that I had learned all the wrong lessons growing up, and I wanted to learn new ones." Denise stared at him, this young man carrying the weight of his father's sins but choosing a different path. "I know I can't undo what my father did," Derek continued, "and I know it might seem strange or even inappropriate for me to approach you, but I needed you to know that your words changed at least one person. I'm going to be a different kind of pilot than my father ever expected me to be. And when I'm in that cockpit, I'm going to treat every passenger, every crew member, every human being with the respect they deserve, regardless of what they look like." Slowly, Denise reached out and shook his hand. That's all any of us can do, Derek. Learn from the past, commit to the future, and try every day to be better than the day before. Derek's eyes glistened with emotion. Thank you, Captain. Thank you for not hating me for what my father did. I never hated your father, Denise said softly. I pitied him. He missed out on seeing the world as it really is, diverse and beautiful and full of possibility. I hope he finds his way to that understanding someday. She patted Derek's shoulder. Now go, finish your training, earn those wings. And when you do, come find me. I want to be there to congratulate you. Derek nodded, unable to speak, and walked away. Denise watched him go, marveling at the unexpected turns life could take. Out of hatred, understanding. Out of prejudice, growth. Out of one of the worst days of her life, connections she never could have anticipated. Jaden appeared at her side, his mother and grandmother in tow. Captain Harper, did you see me waving my wings? Denise laughed, kneeling down to his level. I certainly did. You were the best part of the whole ceremony. Jaden grinned proudly. I'm going to be a pilot. I tell everybody at school. I tell my teachers. I even told the principal. She said I can be anything I want to be. And she's absolutely right, Denise said. You can be anything. A pilot, an astronaut, a president. The only thing that can limit you is you. She pulled out a card from her pocket and handed it to Patricia. When Jaden is old enough for flight lessons, you call that number. I've set up a scholarship fund for young people of color who want to pursue careers in aviation. Jaden will be one of the first recipients. Patricia's eyes widened. Captain Harper, we couldn't possibly. You absolutely can. Denise insisted. This is what it's all about. Passing it on. My father passed it to me. I'm passing it to Jaden. And someday, Jaden will pass it to someone else. She looked up at the sky through the convention center windows, at the clouds drifting lazily in the afternoon light, at the planes visible in the distance making their approach to Atlanta's airport. We keep flying, she said, more to herself than anyone else. No matter what tries to keep us on the ground, we keep flying. And somewhere high above, in the endless blue expanse that had been her home for 15 years, a new generation of pilots was taking to the sky. Black pilots, women pilots, pilots of every background and heritage, proving every day that the only thing that mattered in the cockpit was competence, dedication, and love of flight. Captain Denise Harper had faced discrimination, prejudice, and public humiliation. But she had also found solidarity, change, and hope. She had stood her ground at a gate in Chicago, and in doing so, she had opened gates for countless others. The sky belonged to everyone, and nothing could ever change that. So I want to ask you something important. What lesson did you take from Captain Denise Harper's story? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this story inspired you to stand up against injustice, hit that like button right now. If you want to see more stories about resilience, courage, and triumph, subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Together, we can spread messages of hope and change. Thank you for watching. Until the very end. May you always have the courage to stand tall, the wisdom to know your worth, and the strength to soar above any obstacle in your path. Until next time, keep dreaming, keep believing, and keep flying high. Take care of yourselves and each other. Captain Denise Harper's journey teaches us profound truths about resilience, dignity, and the power of standing firm in who we are. First, your credentials speak louder than prejudice. Denise had 15 years of experience, over 12,000 flight hours, and an impeccable record. No amount of doubt from others could erase her accomplishments. When you know your worth, nobody can diminish it. Second, staying calm under pressure is a superpower. Denise could have exploded in anger, but instead, she responded with composure and clarity. She let her professionalism speak for itself while still firmly calling out injustice. Sometimes, the most powerful response is measured strength, not rage. Third, allies matter immensely. Nathan Rivera stood by his captain without hesitation. Gloria Washington used her expertise to demand accountability. Even strangers in the crowd offered support. None of us fight alone when we build genuine connections. Fourth, representation changes lives. Little Jaden saw a black woman commanding an aircraft, and his entire world of possibilities expanded. When we succeed, we light the path for others coming behind us. Fifth, transformation is always possible. Derek Thornton chose a different path than his father. People can change when confronted with truth and given the opportunity to grow. Finally, justice requires action, not just words. Denise did not simply accept an apology. She demanded systemic change and committed to being part of the solution. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced a moment where someone doubted you based on how you looked? How did you handle it? Share your story in the comments below, because your experience might inspire someone else who is struggling right now. If Captain Harper's courage and dignity moved you, smash that like button to show your support. Subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss powerful stories like this one. And please share this video with a friend, a family member, or a colleague who needs to hear this message today. Every share helps spread awareness and hope. Thank you so much for watching until the very end. Your time means everything to me. I hope this story reminded you that you belong wherever your talents take you, no matter what obstacles stand in your way. May you always find the strength to stand tall, the courage to speak your truth, and the grace to rise above those who try to hold you back. Take care of yourselves, be kind to one another, and keep soaring toward your dreams. Until next time, fly high.